Well, the psalm we've read this afternoon begins with the words, "Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord." And these words of the psalm are in tune with David's response to the death of Saul and particularly Jonathan. David's song, which we have read from 2 Samuel, is powerful, passionate poetry. And as one commentator puts it, in this poetry, we have a deeply moving, pathos-filled personal statement that is at the same time a magisterial statement of public reality. Israel was at that moment without a king, and their army had been crushingly defeated in battle. It was a moment for public mourning, as well as David's personal grief at the loss of his closest friend, Jonathan. There is a time to mourn, and we should never pretend otherwise. And I suspect that we have all had our out of the depths moments. The loss of someone we've loved, perhaps a disturbing medical diagnosis, remorse over some action or words, or perhaps like the psalmist, we have felt that God was far away and no longer near to us. Our gospel reading today presents us with two people who cried from the depths, Jairus and the unnamed woman with the hemorrhaging disorder. And these two characters stand in sharp contrast. Jairus is described as a ruler of the synagogue. He has high status in his community and is respected, but his deep concern for his sick daughter drives him to humble himself before Jesus, the itinerant preacher, who has already aroused opposition from the religious authorities. It has been estimated that in Jesus' time, nearly 60% of live births usually died by their mid-teens. Losing a child to disease was a common occurrence in the ancient world, but Jairus greatly loves this daughter and is therefore willing to do anything in order to save her. So his desperation drives him to Jesus. Well, the crowd's interest is really awakened now, and they press around Jesus as he quickly makes his way to Jairus's home. But then comes an unexpected and unwelcome interruption. Jesus is interrupted by a woman who is also in desperate need. Unlike Jairus, she is a social outcast. And to understand her situation, one needs to remember her cultural context. In the Old Testament tradition, blood was thought to be the container of life. And there were strict purity laws surrounding a woman's monthly menstrual cycle. They're found in Leviticus 15, 19 to 30, if you want to look them up. Women experiencing their monthly cycles were considered to be ritually unclean for the duration of the cycle, and anything or anyone the woman touched was rendered unclean for the duration. And a woman also had to undergo a 7-day purification period when her cycle was over. And she had to wash all her clothes to end the contamination. At a practical level, this meant that while the woman was unclean, she could not leave her home, not sleep in the same bed as her husband, or even sit on the same bench. And she could not engage in any public activities. It was a sort of lockdown. So the woman who touches Jesus' garments is very marginalized, because she's been an outcast for 12 years. Her illness has also impoverished her. Mark tells us that she had spent all her money on doctors and has only got worse. Luke, the physician, in his account rather tactfully leaves out that detail. One can only guess and imagine the depths of despair of this woman. The decision she made to go out on that morning and to take hold of Jesus' clothes would have required remarkable courage Who knows how many years it had been since she was out in public? Every person she touched was made unclean. But her faith in Jesus motivates her. She's heard about him and knows that he is a healer, and she thinks, I've got nothing to lose. Well, we notice some other things about her. The woman is nameless. The Greek text, the literal translation is the woman being in a flow of blood. She's totally identified by her ailment, and this is the only way others see her. We can think of her as representing all those whose lives have been defined by the labels that society puts on them, or the labels perhaps we inflict on ourselves. Labeling people is a common technique for excluding them and making them feel worthless. Words like queue jumper, drug addict, demented, dull bludger, and many others. Secondly, we observe that the woman approaches Jesus secretly and cautiously because she is afraid of being noticed. To be seen and recognized would mean terrible humiliation. So she pushes her way forward behind Jesus, and in one terrified moment reaches out her hands and touches his outer garments. Instantly, she feels different. She knows something has changed within her. For the first time in 12 years, she feels normal. Her intention obviously was to slip away as quickly as possible. But then, horror of horrors, she sees Jesus stop and ask the question, who touched my clothes? Although surrounded by a jostling crowd, Jesus knows that something significant has occurred. The one who was with God at the beginning of creation has heard the cry of this unhappy woman. As Jesus surveys the crowd, she comes forward in fear and trembling and tells him the whole truth. It's always liberating to tell the truth. Jesus said, you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. We seem to be living in an age when truth-telling has become rather rare. We've almost become used to royal commissions and ICAC hearings where public figures, bishops, bankers, and politicians suddenly have severe memory loss and appear unable to speak the truth. In the world of fake news, recognizing the truth is not always easy. Well, the woman expected censure and shame, but instead found compassion and understanding. She hears Jesus call her a daughter and tell her that her faith has made her well so that she can go in peace. For the first time in 12 years, she belongs. Jesus has publicly affirmed her, allowing her to return to the society from which she has been shunned. And when we, like the woman, come to Christ in sincerity and truth, we too are welcomed into God's family. And in the community of the church, we can find a place to belong. And there we can learn how to love, how to forgive, and how to serve. Well, the encounter with the woman has halted the progress towards the home of Jairus. Jesus and his party are about to resume the journey when messengers arrive with the news that the little girl is dead. So they say to Jairus, why trouble the teacher any further? The situation is hopeless. On hearing this news, Jesus responds with the words, do not fear, only believe. The American theologian Barbara Brown Taylor comments that this word from Jesus was not just for Jairus' benefit, and not just for the early Christian community Mark was writing for, but for all of us who suffer from the human condition, who are up against things we cannot control. Doubt is not the opposite of faith, for faith is frequently tinged with doubt. It is fear that is the real enemy. And time again, Jesus counsels his hearers, do not be afraid. Well, it was a big ask for Jairus as he arrives home to find the professional mourners already there, making a great commotion. And Jesus dismisses them with the words, "The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laugh in his face. In contrast to the healing of the woman, which was a public event in front of a crowd, the healing of the 12-year-old girl takes place in the privacy of her room with her distraught parents and 3 of Jesus' disciples. In the hushed quiet of that space, Jesus speaks the words, "Talitha, come," and gently lifts her by the hand. She gets up and walks, to the amazement of the onlookers. Well, both episodes are stories about faith. Neither Jairus nor the sick woman articulate any belief about Jesus, but both of them risk everything on a desperate gamble. And Jesus responded to the audacity of their faith. Jesus literally reaches out to touch those whose touch is supposed to render him unclean. And by his action, Jesus challenges the purity codes that underpin his culture and raises the question of whether these people were ever unclean in the first place. Paul, we know, had his out-of-the-depths moments. In the first chapter of 2 Corinthians, he admits that on one occasion, he and his companions were so unbearably crushed that they despaired of life itself. But in the reading we've had this afternoon, Paul has something else on his mind. And knowing that his relationship with the Corinthians is rather fragile, he's trying very hard to be tactful. So tactful, in fact, that you may have missed what he's actually trying to say. He's asking the Corinthians to give money, not to him, but money for the support in the church in Jerusalem, the mother church. While the Gentile churches had grown in number and influence, the church in Jerusalem had fallen on hard times. They had faced strong opposition from the Jewish leaders in that city, and many Christians had been expelled from the temple and disowned by their families. People had lost jobs because of their Christian faith. So the church in Jerusalem was having difficulty supporting those who were in need. And in response to this situation, Paul encouraged the Gentile churches under his care to give financial support to the Jerusalem church as a way of showing their love for their Christian sisters and brothers. The heart of his appeal is found in verse 9, where he writes, "For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that by his poverty you might become rich." It's one of the most beautiful texts, I think, in the entire New Testament, and it sums up the good news of the gospel beautifully. Our giving, be it in money or time or actions, is always in response to God's grace and goodness to us. To be part of a Christian community where you know that you are accepted, loved, and forgiven is a gift. We can afford to be generous because God continues to be generous and merciful to us. Amen.